Project management concepts may seem tough at times, but not to worry. You have a coach who makes it as easy as ABC. Here he is to set things straight for you. Your friend, Phil.
Hello, my fellow project managers. Welcome to our daily drill for today. In today's daily drill, we are going to be continuing from where we left off last time. And if you recall, last time we were talking about integration management. So I hope you've got those processes down. Let's go into the scope area for today. Scope starts off with the very first process known as plan scope management. As usual, I will use abbreviations so that you exercise your recall. So plan scope management is the first process, and this is where we get a number of things. We get a scope management plan. We get a requirements management plan. And these plans, they go to a number of places. I just want to show you a few of these. If we can grab the PMBok guide, let me do that. And I want you to journey with me as we go to 5.2, because I want you to see what goes into 5.2 at the more granular level. If you take a look there, you see that we have both of the plans that we got from the first process going into the second one, and this is on page 138 of the PMBok guide. Okay, so look at page 138 and you'll see both of these plans going into the collect requirements process. Collect requirements is where you elicit requirements from the customer. These requirements then become an input to the define scope process. So you'll see reference being made to requirements documentation. Let's head on down to the next page for define scope. This is on page 150. On page 150, you can see the inputs under project documents. We have requirements documentation. So the requirements documentation that you get goes into the define scope process. Define scope gives you an output known as the project scope statement. And the project scope statement then goes into the create WBS process. And create WBS is where we get an output known as the scope baseline. The scope baseline contains the WBS dictionary, and the project scope statement that we just talked about. All of those make up the scope baseline. Okay? Now, if you go to create WBS and you take a look at the scope baseline output, you see that the scope baseline is shown as one of those outputs going into the project management plan ultimately. But let's go to the page where we can see this clearly. So create WBS, data flow, you can see that on page 156, and you can see the scope baseline goes into the project management plan. So that is something to take note of. So implicitly, when you go to the final process of scope, or the final two processes of scope, you are going to have references being made to the project management plan, because this goes into the project management plan. In other words, the develop project management plan process, where we get the project management plan, and that goes into validate scope, where your customer or sponsor are checking the final product that you have created and signed off on in control quality. And ultimately, this goes to control scope as well. And in control scope, this is where we check to make sure we are on track and we're not deviating. But if you take a look at validate scope, let's go there together. This is on page 163. Page 163, you can see that mention is made specifically to the scope baseline. So you really are referring to that scope baseline again here, because that is what you are measuring against. So you got to remember, this scope baseline is part of the project management plan. And when reference is made to it, you usually see as a sub-bullet under project management plan the scope baseline. All right, so that's for validate scope, and the same thing for control scope. If you take a look, you can also see the scope baseline, because you've got the project management plan also shown as going to control scope. But when you boil it down, it's really the scope baseline that you are anchoring back to the variance analysis that you're doing in control scope. So my friends, there you have it. Those are the processes of scope management. Got plan scope management, collect requirements, define scope, create WBS, validate scope, and control scope. And honestly, if you're taking the exam, it's time, my friends, for you to get this stuff anchored, wired into your subconscious and your conscious, because it is hard to succeed on the exam without this awareness, without this consciousness, okay? So I deliberately put this together for you, for those students of mine who are struggling, and I'm hoping that this helps you to succeed in your mastery of page 25 and ultimately the exam. Don't forget, visit the website, Praizion.com, for more PMP exam training material. Take care. See you in the next episode.